Close your eyes and imagine Rome in 331 BC. Not the marble metropolis of emperors and gladiators you've seen in movies. This is the Rome of the Republic, rougher, older, still clawing its way toward dominance over the Italian peninsula. The city smells of olive oil, wood smoke, and human sweat packed into narrow streets between stone buildings. It's late at night, the kind of night where honest people bolt their doors and only fools or criminals walk the streets. But look there, a single window still glows with lamplight in a patrician mansion on the Palatine Hill. If you could float closer, peer through the opening, you'd see something that would change Roman history forever. A woman, aristocratic by her dress and bearing, sits at a table. Her hair is elaborately styled in the fashion of Republican Rome. Her stola, the long dress of respectable married women, is made of expensive fabric. But her hands are working with tools that seem out of place in such refined surroundings. A mortar and pestle, grinding something that releases a bitter, acrid smell into the night air. She's not alone. Another woman watches from the shadows, younger perhaps, nervous. They speak in whispers too low to hear. But watch the older woman's face. There's no hesitation in her movements, only grim determination. She's done this before. What is she making? Medicine, she would tell you if asked. And in a way, she wouldn't be lying. The selective death. Something was killing the most powerful men in Rome. It started slowly, a consul here, a senator there. Sudden illness. Violent vomiting. Convulsions. Death within hours or days. The symptoms came without warning, struck down men in their prime, and left their wives as grieving widows. At first, Rome did what cities always do when death arrives unexpectedly. They looked for natural causes. Perhaps it was something in the water? Bad air from the Tiber? A pestilence brought from the countryside? But then people started noticing a pattern. A very specific, very disturbing pattern. The plague was selective. Surgically precise, you might say. It killed patricians, the aristocratic class that ruled Rome. It killed senators and magistrates. It killed military commanders and wealthy landowners. These were the men who made laws in the Forum, who commanded legions, who owned vast estates and hundreds of slaves. But it didn't kill poor men. It didn't kill slaves. It didn't kill the plebeians who worked the markets and the docks. And it never, not once, killed a woman. Picture yourself as a Roman citizen in 331 BC, watching this unfold. One funeral procession after another, all men, all wealthy, all powerful. The air thick with incense and the wailing of professional mourners. Wives dressed in black, faces covered, bodies trembling with what everyone assumed was grief. But was it grief? Or was it something else? The official record. The ancient Roman historian Livy, writing centuries later but drawing on older sources, recorded the event in his History of Rome. His account is brief, almost dismissive. A pestilence broke out, and when it carried off many men of all ranks, a slave woman came to Quintus Fabius Maximus and promised to reveal the cause of the public calamity if he would guarantee her immunity from punishment. A pestilence. A plague. Natural causes. That's the official version. But notice what Livy says next. A slave woman promised to reveal the cause. Not discover it. Not investigate it. Reveal it. As if the cause was already known, already hidden, already a secret being kept. Keep that in mind as we dig deeper into this story. The conspiracy theory. Now, here's where we enter speculative territory. Here's where the forbidden archive opens and shows us the version of history that makes patrician men uncomfortable. What if the plague wasn't a plague at all? What if it was Rome's first documented mass poisoning? What if the most powerful men in the Republic were being systematically murdered by the women closest to them, their own wives? The whispers started almost immediately, according to later sources. servants gossiping in the markets, freedmen exchanging knowing looks, people who worked in aristocratic households, who saw things they weren't supposed to see, who heard conversations through thin walls. They spoke of women gathering at night, of mysterious herbs being ground into powders, of careful additions to wine cups, of wives who showed no surprise when their husbands suddenly collapsed at dinner. But whispers are just whispers. Gossip is just gossip, until someone breaks the silence. To understand why this conspiracy, if it was a conspiracy, might have happened, we need to understand what it meant to be a Roman wife in 331 BC. Picture yourself born female in Republican Rome. From the moment you take your first breath, you are property. Not metaphorically. Legally. Actually, property. The life cycle of ownership. You begin as your father's property. He has patria potestas, paternal power, over you. This isn't just parental authority as we understand it. It's absolute legal control. Your father can sell you into slavery if he wishes. He can kill you if you dishonor the family. He can force you into any marriage he chooses, regardless of your age or wishes. You have no legal identity separate from your father. You cannot own property in your own name. You cannot make contracts. You cannot testify in court except in very limited circumstances. You are, legally speaking, a perpetual child. Then, when you reach puberty, sometimes as young as 12 or 13, you are transferred to a new owner, your husband. The marriage ceremony itself makes this transfer explicit. Your father leads you to your husband's house. There's a ritual where you're symbolically captured and carried over the threshold. Your name changes, you take your husband's family name. Your legal identity is absorbed into his. And now you belong to him. The reality of Roman marriage. Let's be very clear about what Roman marriage meant for women in this period. You have no right to refuse sex. The concept of marital rape doesn't exist in Roman law because wives are understood to have given permanent sexual consent by the act of marriage. You have no right to divorce. Your husband can divorce you at will, for almost any reason or no reason, but you cannot divorce him. If you try to leave, you've abandoned your legal guardian. You can be forcibly returned, punished, even killed. You have no right to your children. If your husband dies, his male relatives, not you, get guardianship of your children. If you're divorced, your husband keeps the children. Boys. You're the mother, but they're not legally yours. You have no right to refuse your husband's sexual use of slaves in the household. He can rape the slave women, and you must pretend not to notice. If you object, you're a difficult wife. You have no economic independence. Any money or property you brought to the marriage becomes your husband's to manage. You can't make financial decisions. You can't work for pay. That would be disgraceful for a patrician woman anyway. You're economically helpless. And perhaps most importantly, you have no legal recourse for abuse. The violence no one mentions. Here's what the ancient sources don't talk about, but what we can infer from the legal structures and occasional glimpses in literature. Domestic violence was not a crime. It was a husband's right. If your husband beat you, who could you complain to? Your father? He transferred you to your husband's authority. The magistrates? They have no jurisdiction over a man's treatment of his own wife. That's a private family matter. If he starved you, humiliated you in front of guests, locked you in a room for days, all of this was within his legal rights as paterfamilias. The only limit on a husband's authority was public opinion, and public opinion in Republican Rome generally sided with male authority. A man who killed his wife for adultery was praised. A man who divorced his wife for drinking wine, yes, really, women were sometimes forbidden from drinking wine, was considered upright and moral. There are hints in the sources of just how bad it could get. Valerius Maximus, writing centuries later, preserves stories of husbands beating their wives to death for minor infractions. Not as crimes, but as examples of strict moral virtue. The psychiatric prison. Now add the psychological dimension. You're educated enough to understand your situation, but powerless to change it. You can read and write, discuss philosophy, understand politics, but you can never participate in any of it. You're smart enough to see the cage you're in, but the bars are made of law and custom so strong that no individual can break them. You're surrounded by luxury if you're wealthy, fine clothes, elaborate meals, beautiful houses, but all of it belongs to your husband. You're living in someone else's house, wearing someone else's property, eating someone else's food. You're a guest in your own life. You're constantly surveilled. Slaves report on your behavior. Your husband's relatives watch you. Your every action is judged by impossible standards. If you're too friendly with male visitors, you're suspected of adultery. If you're not friendly enough, you're rude and antisocial. If you speak too much, you're shrewish. If you speak too little, you're sullen. You're trapped in a performance of ideal womanhood that no real human could maintain. And the punishment for failure is divorce, public shame, or death. This is what it meant to be a patrician wife in 331 BCE. Now imagine living in that cage for years, for decades, until your youth is gone, your health is broken, your spirit is crushed. Imagine watching your husband abuse you, humiliate you, cheat on you openly while you must smile and play the perfect wife. Imagine having no escape, no divorce, no refuge, no hope, and then imagine discovering that there might be a way out after all. The story, as Livy tells it, centers on two women, Cornelia and Sergia. We know nothing else about them, no family names, no husbands' identities, no ages or backgrounds. They exist in the historical record only as names attached to a crime. But let's imagine them. Let's fill in the blanks that history left empty. The organizers. Cornelia is older, perhaps in her 40s. She's been married for 25 years to a senator who treats her like expensive furniture, valuable for display, but without feelings or needs of her own. She's educated, intelligent, bitter. She's buried 2 children who died in infancy. She's survived miscarriages and difficult births. Her body bears the scars of reproductive trauma that would have killed a less resilient woman. She knows herbs. In Republican Rome, aristocratic women were often responsible for household medicine. They treated sick slaves, prepared remedies for children, managed the health of the household. Cornelia has been doing this for decades. She knows which plants cure fevers, which ones ease pain, which ones help with sleep. And she knows which ones kill. Sergia is younger, maybe late 20s. Beautiful, married to a military commander twice her age. He married her for her dowry and her family connections. He keeps a slave girl in the household for his pleasure and doesn't bother hiding it. When Sergia tried to object, once, early in the marriage, he beat her so badly she couldn't walk for a week. She learned to keep quiet after that. But the rage didn't go away. It just went underground. The first death. How did it start? Maybe like this. Cornelia and Sergia are friends, or as close to friends as aristocratic women can be in a society that keeps them isolated from each other. They meet at religious festivals, at public baths, at the occasional dinner party where wives are allowed to attend. One day, perhaps at the baths, Sergia appears with new bruises, poorly concealed by cosmetics. Cornelia sees. Says nothing in public. But later, when they're more alone, she asks. Sergia breaks. Tells the story. The beating. The humiliation. The slave girl. The absolute impossibility of escape. And Cornelia, looking at this young woman who reminds her of herself decades earlier, makes a decision. There might be a way, she says quietly, but you would have to be very brave. and very careful. Within a month, Sergia's husband dies. Sudden illness. Violent stomach pains. The doctors are baffled. A funeral is held. Sergia plays the grieving widow perfectly. And when the will is read, she discovers she's inherited a significant portion of his estate, as widows could under certain circumstances. She's free, wealthy, independent for the first time in her life. And word spreads quietly among the women who know. The network grows. This is speculation, but it's informed speculation based on how clandestine organizations actually function. The network would have started small. Cornelia and Sergia, maybe one or two other trusted women. They would have been extremely careful, meeting in private, speaking in code, trusting no one outside the circle. But as more husbands died and more women were freed, the network grew. Not openly, not obviously, but through whispered recommendations and knowing looks. A woman in an abusive marriage might confide in a friend. That friend might say, "I know someone who could help." An introduction is arranged. A meeting is held in someone's private chambers, late at night when the slaves are asleep. The new woman is evaluated. Can she be trusted? Is she desperate enough? Is she brave enough? Most importantly, will she stay silent? If the answers are yes, she's brought into the circle. She learns the techniques. She's given the herbs or taught how to prepare them. She's instructed in how to administer them slowly, over time, so the death looks natural. She's warned about the consequences of getting caught or talking. And then she goes home and begins to poison her husband. The methods. Let's talk about the practical aspects, because this is where speculation becomes informed by historical and toxicological knowledge. What herbs were available in 4th century BC Italy that could kill slowly without being immediately obvious? Aconite, wolfsbane, causes cardiac arrest, but the symptoms can mimic heart disease. Hemlock, the poison that killed Socrates, causes paralysis and respiratory failure, but can be administered in small doses over time. Belladonna, deadly nightshade, causes confusion, hallucinations, and eventually death. Could be mistaken for delirium from fever. White lead, lead acetate, sweet tasting, could be added to wine. Causes chronic poisoning with symptoms that look like wasting disease. Arsenic compounds, available in nature, particularly from certain minerals. Causes gastric symptoms that mimic food poisoning or disease. The key would be slow administration. A small amount in wine every few days. Just enough to keep the victim perpetually unwell, gradually weakening. Over months, the symptoms would worsen. Weight loss, weakness, digestive problems, eventually organ failure. To observers, it would look like a wasting disease. A mysterious illness. Bad luck. Not murder. The secret meetings. Imagine the gatherings. 20 women, maybe more, in a secure location. Perhaps a room in someone's house that can be locked from the inside. Perhaps a secluded garden at night. Perhaps even a religious sanctuary where women were allowed to meet for worship. They arrive separately over the course of an evening, so as not to attract attention. Slaves are sent away or the most trusted ones are kept as lookouts. Cornelia presides. She's the expert, the teacher, the one who understands the herbs and their effects. She brings out the materials, dried plants, powders, liquids in small vials. She demonstrates the grinding, the mixing, the proper doses. But it's not just about technique. These meetings serve another purpose: solidarity. Psychological support. These women are committing murder. Even if they believe it's justified, even if their husbands are abusive monsters, the act of killing another human being is traumatic. They need each other. They need to share their fears, their guilt, their justifications. They need to remind each other why they're doing this. They need to know they're not alone. My husband beat me last night, one might say. But I added a little more to his wine this morning. Soon I'll be free. Mine suspects nothing, another reports. He thinks his illness is from bad fish at the tavern. They laugh, darkly. Bitter laughter from women who have learned that the only power available to them is the power to destroy. The psychological profile. Were these women psychopaths? Monsters? Cold-blooded killers? Or were they desperate people using the only weapon available to them? Modern psychology recognizes that people in extreme circumstances, particularly people who are trapped, abused, and powerless, can commit acts they would never consider under normal conditions. These weren't women who enjoyed killing. They were women who saw killing as the only path to freedom. They were women who had been systematically dehumanized, brutalized, and denied every form of legal recourse. They were women who had been driven to the absolute edge of what a human being can endure. Does that justify murder? That's not for me to say. But it explains it. Every conspiracy has a weak link. Every secret eventually finds someone who can't keep it. In this case, according to Livy, it was a slave woman. The informant. She's unnamed in the historical record. Just a slave woman. No age, no description, no backstory. History didn't care about her identity. She was just the mechanism by which the conspiracy was exposed. But let's think about who she might have been. Perhaps she was a personal slave to one of the conspirators. Perhaps she overheard conversations, saw the late-night meetings, noticed her mistress grinding strange herbs and adding them to her master's wine. Perhaps she was terrified. If the conspiracy was discovered and she had known about it, she could be tortured and executed as an accomplice. Roman law was brutal with slaves who failed to report their master's crimes. Or perhaps she was offered something. Freedom, maybe. Money. Protection. Roman authorities were perfectly willing to offer immunity to informants who helped them crack cases. Or perhaps, and this is the darkest possibility, perhaps she actually cared about the men being killed. Perhaps her master, however terrible he was to his wife, had been kind to her. Perhaps she felt loyalty to him. Perhaps she genuinely believed the poisonings were wrong. We'll never know her motivations. But we know what she did. She went to Quintus Fabius Maximus, one of Rome's most powerful magistrates, and told him everything. The investigation. Imagine being Fabius Maximus when this information lands in your lap. A slave woman is claiming that Rome's mysterious plague isn't a plague at all. She's claiming that aristocratic wives, women from the best families in Rome, have formed a conspiracy to murder their husbands. She's naming names. She's describing methods. She's offering to provide evidence. Your first reaction is probably disbelief. This is insane. Women? Quiet, obedient, powerless women? Organizing a mass murder campaign? Impossible. But then you start thinking about the pattern. The selective nature of the deaths. The fact that only wealthy men are dying. The fact that all of them have been married. And you realize she might be telling the truth. Fabius Maximus does what any competent investigator would do. He offers the slave woman immunity in exchange for cooperation. Then he starts gathering evidence. He orders surveillance on the women she's named. He has informants placed in their households. He waits and watches. And soon enough he catches them in the act. 3. Picture the moment of the raid. It's night. The women are gathered in Cornelia's house, or perhaps Sergius. Maybe 20 of them, maybe more. They're preparing their poisons, sharing information, supporting each other. They don't hear the guards approaching. The first they know of the disaster is when the door crashes open and armed men flood into the room. The scene freezes. Women scream. Some try to run, but there's nowhere to go. The building is surrounded. Others stand paralyzed with shock. In the center of it all, Cornelia and Sergia. The leaders, the organizers, the women who taught all the others how to kill. They're arrested. All of them. Their hands are bound. They're dragged through the streets of Rome in the middle of the night, aristocratic women treated like common criminals, a scandal that will be whispered about for generations. By morning, all of Rome knows. The plague has a cause. And it's not divine anger or bad air or mysterious illness. It's their wives. The public reaction. The city explodes with panic and paranoia. Suddenly, every husband in Rome is looking at his wife with suspicion. Every cup of wine is examined before drinking. Every meal prepared by women is treated as potentially poisonous. Slaves are interrogated. Households are searched for suspicious herbs. The forum is in chaos. Senators demand immediate trials and executions. Some call for wholesale investigations of all aristocratic households. Others worry about the precedent. If we start suspecting all wives, how can any man feel safe in his own home? The women of Rome are terrified. Even those who had nothing to do with the conspiracy fear they'll be accused. Any woman who had a sick or recently deceased husband is now under suspicion. Any woman who showed insufficient grief at her husband's funeral is remembered and whispered about. And in the prison, 20+ women wait for their fate. The trial, such as it was probably brief. Roman justice in this period wasn't about establishing guilt beyond reasonable doubt. It was about maintaining social order. The evidence was clear. Poison ingredients had been found in the women's possession. Multiple witnesses, likely slaves who had been tortured, testified to seeing them prepare the substances. The slave informant described the conspiracy in detail. But there was a problem. How do you convict aristocratic women of such a massive crime without bringing scandal on their families? These weren't just any women. They were wives and daughters of senators, of military commanders, of Rome's most powerful families. The solution was elegant and horrible. According to Livy, the accused women claimed the substances weren't poisons at all. They were medicines, healing tonics, beneficial herbs. The accusation was absurd. They were innocent. If that's true, Cornelia allegedly said, we'll prove it. We'll drink them ourselves. Whether she actually suggested this or whether it was imposed on them by the magistrates, the result was the same. The women were told to drink their own preparations. Think about this moment. Really think about it. These 20+ women are standing in a public space, perhaps the forum, perhaps a space near it. They're surrounded by guards, by magistrates, by angry crowds of Roman citizens demanding justice. They're looking at vials and cups containing the substances they've been using to slowly kill their husbands. They know exactly what's in those cups. They know exactly what will happen if they drink them. They have a choice, technically. They could refuse. They could confess. They could beg for mercy. But what would mercy look like? If they confessed, they'd be condemned to death anyway, probably by crucifixion or being thrown from the Tarpeian Rock, the traditional execution site for traitors. They'd be tortured first, probably to extract more names. Their families would be disgraced forever. And they'd be giving their interrogators the satisfaction of their confession. They'd be admitting that they were weak, criminal, shameful. They'd be accepting the narrative that they were villains. Or they could refuse to confess. They could maintain their dignity. They could go out on their own terms. And they could take their secrets with them. The mass suicide. Cornelia looks at Sergia. Sergia looks back. They've been preparing for this possibility, perhaps, since the conspiracy began. They knew it might end this way. They take the cups. The other women watch them, taking courage from their example. If we're going to die, Cornelia's expression seems to say, we'll die as we lived, making our own choices, even if those choices are terrible. They drink. According to Livy, they all drank. 20 women, maybe more, taking poison in public view, proving, by the act of dying, that the substances were indeed poisonous, confessing through death what they refused to confess in words. The effects would have been rapid if they took full doses. Depending on the poison, hemlock, aconite, belladonna, the symptoms would have been violent. Convulsions, vomiting, difficulty breathing, paralysis. Within minutes, they begin to collapse. One by one, they fall to the stone floor. Some die quickly. Others take longer, their bodies fighting the poison even as it shuts down their organs. The crowd watches in horror. This isn't like the executions they're used to, the distant spectacle of criminals being punished. This is something else. These are aristocratic women, well-dressed and defiant, choosing death rather than submission. It's disturbing. It's unforgettable. It's the kind of scene that will be whispered about for centuries. Within an hour, they're all dead. 20+ bodies on the ground. The conspiracy ended not with confessions and betrayals, but with mass suicide. The aftermath. But the story doesn't end there. Livy tells us that the investigation continued. More women were implicated. In the end, about 170 matrons were condemned for poisoning. 170 women. Let that number sink in. This wasn't a small conspiracy. This was a network that had spread throughout the upper reaches of Roman society. This was systematic, organized, large-scale resistance. And it had been happening for who knows how long before it was discovered. Some of these 170 women were probably poisoners. Others were probably just associated with the group, or suspected of being associated, or falsely accused by enemies or opportunistic informants. Roman justice in a panic doesn't distinguish carefully. When the state feels threatened, it strikes broadly. How many of those 170 women were guilty? How many were innocent? We'll never know. They were all condemned together, their names lost to history, their fates unrecorded. The conspiracy was crushed. The threat was eliminated. Order was restored. Or was it? We're at the end of the story. Or at least, the end of the story as the ancient sources tell it. But we're not done yet. Because the most important question hasn't been answered. Was any of this actually real? The skeptical view. Let's consider the possibility that the entire thing was fabricated, or at least massively exaggerated. Rome in 331 BCE is experiencing a genuine plague. An actual epidemic, caused by disease, bad sanitation, contaminated water, whatever. People are dying, and the deaths do seem to cluster among the wealthy because they live in densely packed urban areas, they travel more, they have more contact with visitors from plague-affected areas. The city is in panic. The people demand an explanation. The government is desperate to restore confidence and order. And then someone, maybe a slave trying to avoid punishment for something else, maybe a person with a grudge against specific aristocratic women, maybe even a government official looking for a scapegoat, comes forward with the perfect story. The plague isn't natural. It's the women. It's a conspiracy. It's poisoners. This story is perfect because it provides a clear explanation for the deaths. It identifies specific villains who can be punished. It reinforces patriarchal control by reminding everyone how dangerous women are. It allows the government to look competent and in control. The investigation confirms what everyone is primed to believe. Herbs found in women's homes, used for actual medicine, are reinterpreted as poisons. Slaves, under torture, confess to what their interrogators want to hear. A mass panic creates mass accusations, and once the process starts, it feeds itself. The women who drink the poison? Maybe they're actually innocent, trying to prove their medicines aren't dangerous. Or maybe they're guilty of some minor offense, adultery, perhaps, or financial crimes, and they choose suicide rather than face torture and disgrace. The 170 condemned women? victims of a witch hunt, not an actual conspiracy. This interpretation fits what we know about how societies react to crises. When something terrible happens, plague, famine, military defeat, people need someone to blame. And throughout history, women have been convenient scapegoats. The believer's view. But here's the other possibility: it actually happened, more or less as described. Consider the plausibility. Women in Republican Rome had clear motive. They were trapped in abusive marriages with no legal recourse. They had means, access to herbs, knowledge of poisons from their role in household medicine, ability to administer substances to their husbands regularly. They had opportunity. Roman wives prepared their husbands' food and drink, managed the household, had access to them daily. And we have historical precedent. Poisoning by family members wasn't unknown in the ancient world. It happened. We have documented cases from other periods and places. Moreover, the specific details in Livy's account, the organized network, the secret meetings, the mass suicide, are too elaborate to be simple fabrication. If someone was making up a story to cover for a natural plague, why include all these details? Why not just say, some women were found to be poisoning their husbands, they were executed, the plague stopped? The complexity of the story suggests it might actually be based on real events, even if those events were later embellished or misunderstood. The truth in the middle. The most likely scenario? Somewhere between these extremes. Perhaps there really was a poison conspiracy, but it was smaller than the sources claim. Maybe 5 or 10 women, not hundreds. Maybe the conspiracy existed, but the plague was also real, and the two got conflated in people's minds. Perhaps the conspiracy was real, but the deaths were exaggerated. Maybe a few men actually were poisoned, and then during the panic, every unexplained death got attributed to the conspiracy. Perhaps the conspiracy started as something else. Maybe women sharing actual medical knowledge or discussing ways to survive abusive marriages, and only turned to poison in a few cases, but the entire network got blamed. We're never going to know the exact truth. The sources are too limited, too biased, too distant from the events. But here's what we do know: the story persisted. It was remembered. It was retold by multiple ancient authors. It became a permanent part of Roman historical memory. Whether it happened exactly as described or whether it was partly myth, it revealed something true about Roman society. The possibility of such a conspiracy was believable. The motive was clear. The conditions that might drive women to such desperate measures were real. The legacy. The story of the Roman poison conspiracy entered the cultural imagination and never left. It appears in medieval and Renaissance texts as a cautionary tale about women's nature. It's referenced in early modern discussions of witchcraft and poisoning. It shows up in feminist writings as an example of women's resistance to patriarchy. In the 18th and 19th centuries, it was used both to argue for and against women's rights. Some said, "See, this is what happens when women are oppressed, they turn to desperate measures." Others said, "See, this proves women can't be trusted with power or freedom." And it continues to fascinate us today. Because whether or not it actually happened, it asks a profound question. When all legal avenues are closed, when all peaceful means of escape are blocked, when the system is designed to trap you forever, is violence justified? The modern parallel. Think about how we discuss domestic violence today. We've finally started to recognize that women who kill abusive partners, even when there's no immediate threat at the moment of killing, may be acting in self-defense. We call it battered woman syndrome or intimate partner violence. We acknowledge that someone can be in such constant danger, such psychological terror, that killing their abuser is a rational survival strategy. The Roman wives, if the conspiracy was real, were in an even worse position. They couldn't call the police. They couldn't file for divorce. They couldn't press charges. They couldn't leave. The law gave them no protection. Society gave them no refuge. If a modern woman kills her abuser after years of torture, we debate whether it's justified. Was it different for these Roman women? Or is it just that their cage was more complete, their options even more limited? I'm not saying poison conspiracies are good. I'm saying that when you build a system that gives people no way out, you shouldn't be surprised when they find their own way out, however dark. The archive reveals. And this is why this story belongs in the forbidden archives. Because the official version, the one Roman men told themselves, was simple. Wicked women conspired to murder innocent men. Justice was served. The end. But the fuller story, the one hidden in the margins and the silences, is more complex. Women trapped in an impossible system may have taken desperate measures. They may have fought back the only way they could. And whether or not the specific events happened exactly as described, the story reveals a truth about power, gender, and violence that makes people uncomfortable even today. The conspirators, if they existed, left no written testimony, no manifestos, no justifications in their own words. We have only the accounts of men who feared them, judged them, killed them. But their story survived anyway. Hidden in the official histories, disguised as a simple tale of crime and punishment, is a record of resistance, of refusal, of women who said no more and meant it. The final image. Picture one last scene with me. An empty cup on a stone floor. Around it, 20 bodies. Aristocratic women in expensive robes, now still forever. Their faces are frozen in their final moments. Pain, yes, but also something else. Relief, perhaps. Or defiance. Or simply peace. They could have confessed. They could have begged. They could have named names and bought themselves a few more days of life. They chose this instead. And in that choice, whether they were guilty of conspiracy or innocent victims of a witch hunt, they claimed the one power that no law, no husband, no empire could take from them, the power to say when they were done. The camera slowly pulls back. The Forum at night. The city of Rome sleeping, unaware of what tomorrow's history books will make of this night. And in the darkness, the question echoes. Was this justice? Or was this another crime, piled on top of all the others? Fade to black. Epilogue. The archives never close. This is the story of Rome's poison conspiracy, or the story of how Rome destroyed innocent women during a plague panic, or the story of the limits of patriarchy and what happens when you push people too far. All of these versions might be true. None of them might be true. The archives are fragmentary, the sources are biased, the truth is lost to time. But the questions remain. How do we judge desperate acts by desperate people? How do we read history written by the winners? How do we hear the voices that were silenced? The forbidden archives don't give you easy answers. They give you the complicated, uncomfortable stories that make you question everything you thought you knew. Welcome to the truth behind the marble.